Evening, ladies and gentlemen. They say birds of a feather flock together. So welcome to a doctoral, I would say it's PIM, a doctoral workshop with regard to how to proceed with our doctoral studies. So I'm indeed privileged to welcome Professor Robert Pfaff for the second time. He was gracing the inauguration at the PIMARC 2025 and he was with us virtually 3 years ago. So this is wonderful opportunity where he would be talking about how to complete a PhD successfully. In the audience, there are DB participants also. It's all doctoral, how to complete the doctoral program successfully. And I don't need to give him any introduction. He does not need an introduction. He's a globally renowned pitching doctor. That's the way he is known because he's a pioneer of introducing the pitching competition and the pitching way of presenting your research. I am sure some of you have participated in the pitching competition. And last time I was telling that in the inauguration also, one of our doctoral students won the Sri Lanka's #1 and then he became #6 in the globe. So without further ado, let Professor Pfaff present his wonderful thoughts. Shall we welcome him with a big round of applause?
Thank you very much. You're so kind. It's lovely to be here and enjoying my visit to Australia, my first time in your wonderful country. And apologies that I should have had completed doctoral degree successfully, I guess. Apologies to DBAs. So we have an hour and a half. When things are online, and mostly now a lot of things are online, I don't like interaction because you rely on technology and often the audio is no good or the video is no good or both are no good, and having an inviting interaction online, I just never do it. In person, however, do enjoy interaction. So what I propose we do is that give me a little bit of time before maybe you ask a question, so that maybe 10 minutes, and then if I'm saying something that you find confusing or whatever, probably confusing, it'll be my fault, not yours. But if you have a comment or a question, let it be known, and we'll go that way. I've got prepared slides. We don't have to go through every slide. We don't have to finish the deck. If we have a lot of discussion that is valuable to you, and the slides sort of help us have some framework, I think that's the best outcome. Having said that, if we stick pretty closely to the slides and we go that direction, that will be good as well. So the slides I'm happy to share with you. So you don't really need them right now, but you might want them later on. And so I hope they are a benefit to you. Just a quick word explanation of the photo on the right. So it's very odd. I'm an Australian. That's a lot to start with, I guess. I have to apologise for Australians. But I worked all of my career, except for the last almost a year, all my career in Australia. And for Australian institutions, but now I'm working for a university in Budapest, in Hungary, the Corvinus University of Budapest. I still live in Australia, and that is a photo of a famous bridge. I don't know if many or any of you have been to Budapest, the Green Bridge, and the building in the background, that old building, is one of the main buildings of that university. So when I was pulling together some thoughts and material and for this talk yesterday, basically, and it wasn't like I had to create everything from scratch. I had a variety of material that I could bring together, but over the last year or two, probably 2 or 3 years, I've been experimenting with the bot. And there are many different bots. It turned out I started off with ChatGPT, and I'm sort of a creature of habit, and so whenever I get a chance, I use that that particular bot, and so I tested it out, and so the first, I guess it'll be 10 slides. I asked ChatGPT. I said to the ChatGPT, I've got this talk. The title of the talk is, as you know, on the cover slide. Give me 10, top 10 tips. And so that's what we're going to have a look at. And I think, to a large extent, the tips that ChatGPT came up with are pretty okay, pretty decent. I'm not saying they're the best and you'll never find any better, but I think it's worth having a look at what it came up with. And maybe as we work through this, if at certain stages you want to disagree or you want to add, and we might see whether after we get through the 10, do you think somehow there's an error of omission? You might also want to argue there's an error of commission, but I'm not so sure about that. But is there anything that, in a broad sense, and I guess these tips are at a sort of higher level. There's also sorts of ways you can try and address the question of completing a big task, any big task, at a higher level, detailed level, looking at one direction, different perspectives or whatever. So we can talk about this forever, but this is what it came up with. So the first one, and I just used the order that it presented them. I don't think it's in any priority order. And it came up with, well, start with a clear research vision. And seems to me that's making a lot of sense. So if you're sitting in the room right now and you don't, and you'll be in various stages, I imagine. There'll be some of you that are pretty close to just starting, some of you that are somewhere towards the middle, others of you that are near the end, at the end, and I'm guessing 1 or 2 of you are sort of reminiscing of the days when you did your doctoral study. And maybe for those of you in that category, well, let's pretend you're back somewhere in that period that's at least 3 years, I imagine. I'm not entirely sure what time frame you're allowed, but 3 to 4 years is my guess. And so if you are at the beginning, maybe why don't I just get a show of hands, don't be scared. Who, those of you that you sort of think you're near the beginning, either at the beginning or near the beginning. How many of you are at the beginning or near the beginning? So we have a few. Yes. All right. So probably it seems like almost half. Maybe that's a strategy on your part. You sort of go, I'm near the beginning. That'll mean that I'm not going to get asked any questions. So when you're at the beginning of anything, a big journey, marathon. So doing a doctoral degree is not a sprint. It's a marathon. It is entirely acceptable and very, very likely that when you read number 1, you go, oh dear, I don't have a clear vision or research vision. That you feel in your more honest moments, you feel a little bit lost, a little bit overwhelmed. I'm guessing a number of you have a full-time job that's nothing that, well, you're working full-time and you're doing, I'm sort of guessing DBAs, educated guess, almost all the DBAs are working a full-time job and then trying to squeeze in a DBA somewhere. Would that seem a good assumption? And for those of you that are PhDs, probably that's going to apply to you as well, but I can imagine some might be just doing a PhD and well, I was going to say not much else that could be a bit offensive. It could be a lot of hard work to be done at home, etc., etc. Anyhow, it sort of sounds strange that I would say it's acceptable and understandable that at the beginning you don't really feel confident you've got a clear vision. I mean, it sounds strange, but in another way, I think it, and I'm saying it and emphasizing it to be comforting, apart from anything else. And the journey that you're on, everyone has to some degree. So if you feel a little lost, then that's pretty much where everyone goes. And what I would suggest at in terms of a flip side to that, if you don't feel, there'll be certain people that are super confident and will say very stridently, even at the beginning, I am not lost. I know exactly where. Well, that could be a problem. Well, because you may not know where you're going. And in fact, research is, like there's many metaphors one could use. Research is not linear. So if you have a vision and you think, and so if we jump in a car or we're navigating, we're at point A and we go to point B, and okay, we have to make some turns, and we can't go straight. There we have to follow the roads, but apart from that, so let's say you were going to another city and it was pretty much a straight road, and you know where to start and where to end. That's not research. That's not a PhD. That's not a DBA. And so it's good to remind ourselves that the journey you're on is non-linear and unpredictable. And you have to accept that and think about how you cope with situations that don't go to plan. So it's good to have a plan, it's good to have a vision, but recognize that you have to adapt to all problems. But so there could be many reasons why your initial vision doesn't work out. It could be the negative side of there's obstacles, problems. There could be time constraints. There could be problems with data. Who knows what? So the negative. The positive side is as you move through the journey and you're making progress, you realize that what you were thinking was a good direction at the beginning wasn't. Now when you're down the track, it's not to say you look back, and sometimes you do look back and go, wow, I was so naive, and that was such silly thinking. But it was more like with the knowledge that you gain, the understanding, the reading, etc., you're changing and adapting in a very positive way, and you feel in control. So you can, it can be both a situation where you're in control and you're driving and, you decide, you are going to head So I'm going on Saturday to Candy. I'm looking forward to that. Let's say you jumped in your car and you decided you were going to Candy, and then you got a little way along and something happens, you see a sign that piques your interest, and you take that turn and you're not going to Candy anymore. You're going somewhere else, which turns out to be, and I've been, they might, as good as Candy. Let's not say better because I might offend someone, but anyway, sorry, I'm babbling. So define your research problem and contribution early, but be open and ready for that initial definition to change and the need to adapt. It's dynamic. And it's good to have plans and it's good to set that out, but it's going to change. And hopefully it's going to change with you in control as opposed to you feeling you're out of control, or at least you don't have control, but you need to change. Be flexible, but ensure your topic is viable and interesting. So this viability, so I highlight little color coding just for me, and I better try and remember to make some comment about it. So before I talk about viable and interesting, back to the start. It's all about starting. You need to start. You need to know that you have to start, and you have to start as well as you can. Viability is, and it's at this point when I start elaborating on things, I think to myself, it's so obvious. It's almost like, why do you need to say this? And I sort of feel that it needs to be said, but a part of me is saying it doesn't need to be said. But viability is like so obvious. So if you have this vision early on and you start making these plans and not thinking about viability, it's pretty obvious. You could end up in some trouble down the track. And one of the most obvious or common examples is to do with data. And whether you're quantitative or qualitative researcher, if you're doing analytical stuff or theoretical, and hopefully, well, when we get to theory and analytical stuff, that becomes very tough to talk about. But I'm assuming we have a common issue to deal with in our research in this room, and that is data. And the most common situation of lacking viability is realizing at some point data that you need in terms of the quantity of data that you need and or the quality of the data that you need, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. So qualitative data is different, but it's easier to think of what I'm trying to paint here as an issue when it's quantitative. Quality and quantity need to be at some threshold level. And it's impossible to make a statement about what, or even the quantity is. I mean, quality becomes super difficult because of all the different contexts, but even the quantity of data. So one can't say you need 30, you need 100, you need 1,000. It depends. But you also need quality data because the data that we gather, I guess one way of thinking of it is the data we gather on key constructs are proxies for the underlying variables. So the variables are the concepts. We can't observe those. And as empiricists, we need to identify quality data that will always come with noise. So think of data as having two components. The thing that you'd love to observe and then something else that is annoyance, which is the noise factor. And so in terms of the quality of data, a good way of at least conceptualizing quality is that you want measures, these metrics, these constructs, to have very low noise and high signal. And if you have a lot of data and it's very low quality, it will have the observations you have will have a small signal and really big noise. And that will undermine the quality of your work. There might be some of these interactive questions I'll throw to you. I don't think I'll, and you know, I've already chewed up so much time and we're only at slide, well, 2, is it, you know, the first slide and then slide 2, but maybe, you know, for many of what are shown on the slides as interactive questions, you can think about those either really quickly in your mind now or potentially think about them later on if you feel it's worth thinking about them. But ChatGPT here suggested the question, well, what excites you about your research and what concerns you the most? And to an extent, I'm okay with that. And to another extent, I'm worried if it's pushed too far. I'm worried if this excitement's pushed too far. And maybe I'll pause there and see whether anyone's willing to speculate as to what concerns me about a discussion, a question that says, what excites you most about your research and what concerns you the most? Well, it's more the you know, so it's good to have that balance. What excites you? What concerns you? Even the part that excites you, there's an element of that may be counter to producing good research, good science, quality science. So does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what I'm thinking about there in terms of excitement or passion? Because a lot of researchers will say the key ingredient, and let's bring this round to the theme of the session. What fact, you know, how can you improve your chances of successfully completing your research? One of the biggest pieces of advice is passion is key. And you might wonder how I could possibly have a little reservation there. So there's part of me, a big part of me that agrees with that. Be passionate about your research. But there's a part of me that's also a little slightly worried. And I wonder whether anyone would want to hazard a guess as to what I might be worried about with passion. Yep. Yes. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So having passion about it, you know, so and often, in fact, I think almost in every case, the business problem that you've identified is in your current employment. So again, a big part of me, let's say 51%, the majority, but I want to leave. So what could I be worried about? So I'm agreeing mostly, but I've also got reservations. Why have I got reservations? And I don't, you know, people will be getting nervous here now. So what's he going to tell me that's going to make me feel not so excited or happy or great about my research? Yep.
Sometimes like the problem which we are trying to address or solve there are others who have looked at it, but not exactly in the angle we are trying to look at it. Like it's like they want halfway into it and stop, not enough to root it out, but also a bit too much to kind of say that it's not yet explored. So they are to kind of draw and balance that line whether that problem has been looked into or not. That can be a bit mind boggling.
Okay, yep. Let me give you a scenario, and it's not that there's a few different ways or angles on this that I could illustrate, but let's think about the following situation. So you're working in an organization and there's a problem that you've identified. Now, it's very likely this problem is not just one that you've identified. So let's think of, so the context I've got in mind now is a larger organization. So let's say you're part of a department, a group of people, and there'll be a leader of the group, and I'm going to, just to help you to see where I'm coming from here, as one of these wrinkles, you're not the current leader of the group. And there's a problem. And you're excited about trying to solve that problem. And of course, all problem, any problem worth trying to solve is going to have a number of different facets to it and a number of different potential solutions. And I would sort of suggest it's not uncommon. Some of those solutions there might be tension between what those potential solutions are. But what if the leader of the group has already decided what he or she thinks is the solution? And it's clear to you and to everyone in your group as their view, maybe to spice it up, there are one or more alternatives that they've made very clear with either good or not so good reason are not solutions. But you as a scientist, as a researcher, as an objective researcher trying to maintain independence, realize and recognize you should be leaving all viable options on the table. Can you see a potential problem there? Let's personalize it a bit more, and this is where it might become a little more uncomfortable, because at least in the scenario I started, the problem was not you, but the problem could be you. And I've got to be a little careful here, and I'm not going to give any example because I think it could get quite controversial, but we all have a set of values. We all have a view of, well, not so much how the world works, but our sort of view of how the world should work, let's say. And we're in a work situation and there is a particular set of or possible outcomes in the research that we are very predisposed towards because they align with our view of the world. And there are another set of possibilities that are contrary to our view of the world. The challenge there is maintaining objectivity. And in the talk I gave yesterday, when I was talking about, and I don't know how many of you were at the Responsible Science Matters, I stressed as one of the pillars of responsible science this idea of aiming to be objective, unbiased, and in that discussion, I think I alluded to, I guess, the tension between being a researcher, being a scientist, versus being an advocate and being an activist. And so there'll be certain topics that you are very passionate about. Actually, I'll backtrack from that. There are potentially certain topics that some people would be very passionate about. I don't want to suggest that any of you in the room would be in this boat. And I've seen this with doctoral students, PhD students, and when I see it, it concerns me that it seems to me as if the main goal, and maybe sort of not just one goal, but related goals for doing the research, well, could be to validate their prior view of what the answer to the problem is, to create a position for themselves with a very clear view of what would be the best outcome, to set up an advocacy activist role, which is a bit more extreme, more just maybe a consultancy sort of area. So if you get a particular result and findings, that is going to position yourself much more comfortably going down that path. So I probably should move on, but I'm dwelling on that. So there's a LinkedIn post that I put up and I can't remember how long ago it was. I've created this series called The Inspires Thought of the Week, and I think it actually might have been the very first one about 3 months ago, where I talked about two types of passion, and my metaphor was cholesterol, good and bad cholesterol. And so I was trying to make the point in that if the passion is in line with good cholesterol, great. If it's in line with bad cholesterol, not so great. So the second one that it came up with, leverage the power of structured planning. And I've already talked a little bit about planning, so we don't need to dwell on this, and it makes sense. So if in doing your research, it's very haphazard, it's random, or it seems random, then that can't be a good thing, right? So whatever, when we a big commitment and a big task, or any task, but a big commitment, a long commitment, a marathon, planning is always going to beat no planning. So use a research roadmap with milestones, yearly, quarterly, monthly. Surprised if you're not doing something like that. I mean, the other one that it's a bit old-fashioned, but I think still works, is a Gantt chart. And then, and I'm not an expert on Gantt chart, but the appealing thing of a Gantt chart in terms of timelines and sort of not so multitasking, but thinking about doing at certain stages more than one thing in any 1 week, let's say, that there's going to be overlaps, and that you're thinking about priorities and consequential actions and activities, etc., etc. So prioritize tasks using the Eisenhower matrix. This is what ChatGPT came up with. Urgent, important. In fact, it reminds me of another of my to the week. It goes into a little bit more, and I can't remember. So I guess there are certain devices that I like. 2x2 matrices, a way of thinking. Think of 2 dimensions that are relevant, and then within each dimension, characterize 2 sort of different aspects. So in terms of the time or urgency, so either urgent or not urgent. it's either important or not, or unimportant, and then thinking of how that can help you make a sort of more strategic view of the task you got ahead in the next week, in the month, in the year, as to the interaction of the urgency and the importance. So the question that it came up with here was, and I've highlighted time management. I think that to me is what the essence of what this would be, as a tip around increasing your success factor for completing your doctoral degree. Again, it's so obvious when someone says it or it's written, but my feeling is, unless we're reminded this and remind ourselves probably more than occasionally, you can easily forget that in a busy life, you're working a full-time job, you've got a family and whatever. Maybe that sort of really drives home the point that in those little pockets of time, hopefully at least an hour here and there, you've got to be super productive and super focused and manage your time very, very carefully. Develop a writing habit early. Should have called this list. No, I have to be careful how I describe this, but stating the obvious. But it's good to have a list of things that are pretty obvious. So these are very high level things. I mentioned this today in my short keynote, and the famous writing a lot is really easy. Writing a little is really tough. Writing at all is really tough, or at least getting into the habit and having good habits around writing. And, some of us find writing is not a problem. And so having an idea that you're going to start early is not a problem. There are others where, whether it's realized by the person or not, it is a problem. And so I've seen many students that love crunching numbers. They love running programs. They love seeing output from econometric models. And so they'll run, millions of regressions. I had a colleague many years ago who's he was doing his PhD. He never finished it, sadly. And I remember he came in one day, he had a great big smile on his face. And I said, Tom, what happened? You look like you won the lottery. And he said, I've just run my millionth regression. He never wrote anything. He not only didn't have this habit of writing early, he just never wrote. And so I think writing something and something productive as opposed to just writing for the sake of it. So write regularly, not just when deadlines loom. Keep a research journal to track ideas and progress. I mean, it's a good idea. I mean, it's a balance between, you don't want to spend too much time writing about the research as opposed to doing the research, but it's worth devoting a meaningful amount of time to just log what you've done, and when there are breaks, and there could be days in between when you're working on something late at night, and then you've got to go on a work trip for the week. You come back and you haven't taken any notes, and the setup cost and in fact lost productivity is something that we should be aware of. How many in the room have some sort of strategy for writing early? There were a lot of you saying that you're pretty early on. Are you writing? Are you trying to write something? And typically early on, it'll be around literature and summaries of papers. Are people writing early, writing often? Are many of you doing? Have you got a journal? I mean, who's sort of keeping a bit of a log, some sort of journal of progress where you're up to? Is anyone doing that? Yeah. I think it's a good idea, but you shouldn't spend, it's not, spend 70% of your allocated time writing the journal. I mean, it's, what strategies do you use or plan to use to make writing a habit? Is something to think about there. Master the art of feedback and revision. Again, pretty obvious. Seek feedback early and often. Advisors, peers, conferences. It can be daunting to seek feedback, but you've got to do it, and you've got to risk embarrassment. No one likes to be embarrassed. I had a colleague, and I'm from he's a senior professor now, and had been at the time for quite a while, and he had a lot of great sayings and a lot of great pieces of advice, and one I saw him many times in a forum like this, and he would talk about making a fool of yourself as sort of something. Well, got to be careful how I say this. Something that you embrace. You don't strive to make a fool of yourself. That wasn't his point. It's easy and it's pointless when you do it over and over again. It's risk, which also reminds me about another related thing, and that is there's no such thing as a dumb question. There is no such thing as a dumb question. I've had many dumb questions, and some of them, they start off as being dumb, and they turn into something that leads to a pot of gold. So you have to risk embarrassment, not only seeking feedback from your supervisors, but from your peers, just having a go, but having an honest and serious go. So his joke, going back to this colleague of mine, he would get up and say, and this was totally flippant on his part, he said, each day he aims to make 99 mistakes. He aims to have, be embarrassed 99 times. Clearly that wasn't the goal and shouldn't be our goal, but we should embrace that. Supervisors, good supervisors, will understand when you are trying, and you need to communicate regularly, and do the best that you can in the time available. And if you do that, at least some of what you do, and you're going to get better at it over time, you build confidence, some of what you'll have will be quite reasonable and allow a conversation to start. So have you ever received feedback that was hard to accept? I think we all have. I mean, early on in your journey, at least in terms of the degree, you won't have had the feedback, but then there'll be prior experience. And it's tough, and it's the natural thing when you get really difficult feedback. Almost every person takes it personally. And it's just human nature. So so a good down the track. So you haven't, you started and you get some feedback on a part of a draft chapter, and it's quite critical. And it reminds me when I don't have so many PhDs now, and it was sort of more in the old fashioned days where it was paper and pens, and I would use a red pen. And I always, would joke with my students, and I should have to be careful how I describe this because it probably not correct, doesn't sound very good, but I said the red symbolized blood. Anyway, I wasn't going to harm anyone, but it was sort of, and it would be covered in red. And on the face of it, it looks super critical, and to an extent it was, but I always strive to make it not only critical but constructive. So what you want when you have this feedback is to, and a good supervisor might get frustrated and not immediately give what, or it won't jump out to you as constructive. But I think then if you feel that you're being criticized, but you can't actually see what advice, constructive advice you can take, then you have to have some sort of conversation with your supervisor and say, hey, you said you didn't like this paragraph or this sentence. Can you give me a little bit more of some guidance as to, well, how can I improve it? What actually can be done? Now, it could be a situation where they say, throw that paragraph completely out. You need that feedback and guidance in terms of piece of advice. Build strong advisor and peer. I think building networks over a long period of time in any endeavor is very valuable. I mean, the network that you have in this room, not to be ignored, and hopefully, there'll be some in the room that you know better and than others. There'll be a bunch of people you may not know too much at all, but hopefully there's an environment, a situation where you can form reading groups or sort of within the group, self-help groups where you're reading each other's work, giving advice, encouragement. So I think it goes beyond just relying on your supervisor or advisor. So there's an obvious question here. How often do you meet with your supervisor? There's no right or wrong answer here. The bad old is, it just can't happen anymore. But, I know sort of people, my contemporary sort of vintage, let's say, sort of going back 30 or 40 years, this story, they met their supervisor on day one, and then the second time they met them was when they handed in their thesis. Now, one has to be careful here as to pointing fingers. I would say a lot of the time there's shared blame. One can't totally say it's the supervisor's fault, but they've got to have, probably being the adult in the room, let's say, the one with the responsibility to guide a novice researcher. Most of the blame has to go to them, but there probably has to be shared blame. And how can you improve your advisor relationship? So for those of you early on, you're just trying to get to know each other. It is a relationship. It's a professional one, and it's one where it should be seen as a win-win, as a collaboration. I always with every single student I ever supervised, I learnt along the way as well. You learn from your students, and they learn from you. Hopefully, it's mostly going in their direction, but it's going to go in two directions. Embrace responsible research practices. So I guess ChatGPT has got used to me, and maybe it's just partly a reflection that I've put a lot of questions through and asking for advice around responsible science. So anyway, this is what it threw up as number 6, and I talked quite a bit about that yesterday, so I won't bore you anymore with it today, but to see what it suggests: maintain research integrity, reproducibility, transparency, consider pre-registration and open science principles. I don't know, and it might be a little bit of a diversion, but has anyone in the room heard of pre-registration? All right, so it's a form of, well, in its more advanced version. So there's sort of a light touch pre-registration, and I won't talk about that. I want to jump straight to I guess the most exciting version of pre-registration is situations in which a journal and a journal editor stand there to encourage researchers to pre-register. And it's particularly relevant to quantitative researchers. And I'm guessing quite a number of you are qualitative. Actually, I'll ask that question now. How many of you are quantitative? And you might be mixed. If you're mixed, put up your hand for quantitative. Right. So I'm guessing most of you are qualitative. So you're qualitative? Yeah. So maybe I won't talk about pre-registration because it's probably far less relevant to qualitative. Avoid the perfectionism trap. A lot of things I have to be careful about because, you know, you could easily be offensive if I come too strong in any particular thing. And I feel like I want to come strong on this, but I know there's probably a number of people in the room are either aware of or have suspicions that they have traits that are in line with being a perfectionist. And I guess it's open to debate. We won't do it now because it's worth our time right now to talk about the pros and cons of being a perfectionist. But I think I have to agree with ChatGPT here 100%. Done is perfect. And so if you're a perfectionist, this is going to be a real problem. I've seen it in many great academics who have, so not just PhD students, doctoral students, but, you know, beyond PhD and you know, functioning, relatively successful academics where their perfectionism is a significant obstacle. And, you know, I hear sort of the argument back is sort of like, well, you know, it has to be perfect. Otherwise, it's not going to be good research. It's not engineer it and don't stress about it. For one thing, perfection is a mirage in science and research. What you aim to do is the best that you can in the time available. And if you're planning and strategy around how this unfolds works out, the time that you have available will allow you to do a very good job. But it will not be perfect. And if what you want to do in your life is something around perfection, well, yes, I don't find any satisfaction, but I think research is probably one of the areas you should avoid. So again, you have to be careful, because I'm very, very sure there's a number of people in the room that, whether they want to, they're aware of it or whatever, are heading in that direction. And as carefully and as sensitively as I can, I urge you to think about how you can deal with that so that you can function. So what do you think? So that's quite controversial, and I'm just babbling on. I'm going to stop and see what is your reaction. Could be seen by some of you, or all of you, or many of you, as something controversial that I'm putting. Oops. Right. Yeah. We'll go to those other. So perfectionism. Am I being harsh? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I want to hear your view. So what I'm saying is, avoid exactly what they said. Avoid the perfectionism trap. Are you happy to run with that? Is anyone worried about the piece of advice? All right. I already mentioned the marathon thing. It's a marathon, a DBA, a PhD is a marathon. So here it's reminding ourselves about very serious people down the track. And many cliches. I apologise for leaning on these too much, but the roller coaster ride of the PhD. So there are inevitably going to be highs and lows. The excitement of the research going well, great. I've never met a PhD student that never had lows, and sometimes they can be pretty low lows, and you need to be aware of that. And I think the bit of advice I remember now that I always give is, in the good times, talk to those closest to you, and they will be your family and your close friends and some of your cohort. But I think probably good example is your family, your partner, and whoever you deem to be your close family. So in the good times, talk to them about the journey that you're on, the commitment that you've given. They'll know about that commitment. And think of the way I think about it as well. Talk to your partner. So for me, I talk to my wife and say, look, so things are good. You can't talk to them when things are bad, right? Because emotions and it's not going to work. So when things are good, and say, look, inevitably I'm going to have things are not going to be so good, and we're all different. We're all wired different. So I'd say to her, and this will apply to some of you, and then others of you will have to have a different sort of scenario. But I'll say to her, I'm probably going to bottle it up. And you'll know something's wrong because I probably won't be speaking very much. I'll be grumpy. And like, I don't want to tell you too much about my flaws, my personal flaws, but lay out, and of course wife knows me pretty well, so yeah, okay, and then in the good times, discuss what the strategies will be to help you. Now, it's not in your shared life, it's not all about you, but in this particular case, it will be, it needs to be about you. That's why you would never have this discussion when you are stressed, because you could easily an argument place, but in the cool light of day and we're all happy. When I'm struggling, don't ask me. Is don't come out and just direct and say, is everything okay? Because that'll probably flip up. And I'll tell us some other way of how to deal with it or whatever. So as I said, everyone's different. Mental health, as well as it's tied in with physical health, is different. Is an issue. So but that's something for us to think about. AI and digital tools. I don't know how many of you have sort of experimented with for example, ChatGPT, etc. I don't know what university policy is. I think universities are worldwide grappling with it. I don't think that there'll be as many universities as there are. There'll be different policy. So clearly, you've got to act within the rules and guidelines of your university. You've also got to act in accordance with your own values and etc. of what you think is appropriate. The one thing I would say is, as a general suggestion, I think it's entirely appropriate to view the use of ChatGPT as an assistant, not as something that will write your thesis for you, will do the analysis or whatever, but as an assistant. Now, there's a grey area, and the grey area is important, and it's something that you chat with your supervisor about, etc., on how you deal with that. Keep the end goal in sight, so thesis and beyond. So this is a tricky one. I think it is important. I do agree. A doctoral degree, a thesis, is a really big commitment. It's a long-term commitment, and it's a serious one, and we shouldn't take it lightly. And it might seem like, because it's long enough, 3 years, whatever, that's all you need to think about. It's certainly very, very important that that's what you keep a focus on. But I do like the suggestion that position your thinking and your work and how you deal with your PhD, at least occasionally, and remind yourself there is a bigger and longer agenda and goal that you have in your career and how your life pans out. So I think if we become too narrowly focused on the PhD in and of itself, that's not a good thing. So in many of these sort of tips, I guess there's a balance to be had, and I think there's it's predominantly, yes, the PhD is the goal and the end, but as you get closer and closer to that end, you should realize it's not an end. Actually, you're heading to just the beginning of the next. And so again, it's a bit, there's all sorts of cliches that one could use there, but I think for me that they're pretty insightful and helpful. So what is your long-term goal after your PhD? How is your current research helping you get there? I talked a lot about responsible science yesterday. I won't bore you anymore, but I had the 3 pillars: credible research, so research that's reliable; relevant research, so I think many of you in the room, the DBAs for sure, you're going to tick the box of relevant research, real world problems at work that you're trying to bring, that you can couch in a way that has a scholarly foundation, and then you're trying to find a solution. That's pretty important. I mean, I would hazard, I would put to you that there are a number of problems in business and in a workplace that are really important and difficult problems that do not have a scholarly base to them. Yeah, we might debate, there'll be some who say, well, there'll always be a scholarly base. Not so sure about that. Sometimes they just are big problems. They need complex solutions, but they aren't research. And one example of that sort of scenario reminds me of the tension, if you like, between doing research and doing consulting. Consulting has a place, it's important, and wouldn't want to denigrate it. And some consulting can lead to valid research exercises, but a lot of consulting doesn't. And we should be aware of that and remind ourselves of that. The DBA, I think, will allow you a little bit more scope there. I think with a PhD, it's much clear, you're going to have much more trouble convincing on certain problems that they have enough research merit. But I would agree, I would be willing to concede with a DBA, you have more scope for dealing with problems that aren't, some problems that will have some degree of a scholarly base. And so that's fine. So relevant research, so it's useful beyond the academy, and then independent research, which I've talked about already. I stumbled across this at some stage, and I think, I thought I'd put this one in because it's just I think a reminder of us to be humble. Science improves when people realize they were wrong. And what concerns and worries me about the research that I've seen, sometimes in detail and sometimes from afar, that I haven't really either it's outside my field or I don't totally understand, where and human people don't want to admit they're wrong. And you can easily think of scenarios where it makes a lot of sense, but it's not science anymore. So you spent 20 years of your career, 30 years of your career, 40 years of your career working on an area and developing yourself as the expert in that area, paper after paper after paper. You're going to admit that you're wrong somewhere along the line? The incentives are for you to never admit that you're wrong. And I think we've got to somehow guard against that. I've talked about scientists and activists. I'm not going to talk about that. I've talked about passion and this is sort of another angle on good and bad cholesterol, really. But the tug of war between the good passion versus and being objective. I talked yesterday, and I won't really say too much. And particularly given this, it seems like a lot of you are qualitative. These examples are quantitative, so it's really p-hacking and harking and open science. We're well into the designated time, and well, maybe I'll just pause and see. Are there any comments or questions that are nagging that you would like to ask? No? Okay. I gather quite a number of you have had exposure to the framework, the pitching research framework. So there's a bunch of slides here which talk about a few of them, show you how they're unfold, that there's a pattern, and then if you're interested, when you get the slides, you can have a closer look yourselves. So one really helpful way, it's not the only way of thinking of that, the importance from this pitching research framework, is as a tool of communication. So one of the things we talked about quite a bit earlier this evening was communication advisor and sort of being brave enough and being willing to sometimes risk some embarrassment. And, you know, it's easier said than done, but this tool can really help you with that. So when you communicate with your advisor, you don't have to go to the advisor with, in effect, a blank page. And, you know, I'm a grumpy old man. And when I think through those times when I got really frustrated and grumpy with students, sometimes undergraduate students, but, you know, same sort of thing, you know, they knock on your door, professor. Well, I wasn't a professor at the time. I just went to your class, you know, your lecture, and I was just wondering if I could, you know, talk to you about it. Sure, okay. So and then there's silence, and it's obvious they just want me to tell them the lecture again. So grumpy me has to say, can you ask me a specific, you know, a specific question? Because I'm not going to repeat the lecture. You were there. So you don't have to go with a blank page. And this can really frustrate and grumpify some old guy, some old person like me. So I'm the oldest, and everyone else is young. So that's what you can view this as. And reprising what I said earlier in another different context, but right here is assign yourself a reasonable amount of time to have a go at this. A week, 2 weeks, unless, you know, if your supervisor or advisor has already said to you, I want you to do it, well, you're a little bit out of control. You know, it's out of your control. You've just got to, you know, you've got to do it. But, you know, voluntarily, you could say, all right, when I have my next meeting in 2 weeks, I'm going to go along with this partially, some stab at this partially, or, you know, if you're further down the track in terms of your reading of the literature. And I'm going to share it with my supervisor and say, look, here's my ideas so far. Now, some of the ideas you'll have will be not very good, far from perfect. It does not matter. As long as you've tried, this will start a conversation. You will get feedback. I guarantee it. Absolutely guarantee it. You'll get feedback. Hopefully it will be constructive, but, you know, we never know. But feedback, constructive feedback about, and so, you know, you could, there's different reactions that, you know, there's probably, I can characterize 3 types of reactions at a general level in terms of what this can do for you as a conversation starter. The person that reads it, your advisor, could be confused. And they'll say to you, you know, what you said here is your research question is whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm confused. What do you mean by this? You know, that's starting a conversation. That's type 1. Type 2 is they say, wow, what you've written here as your main idea, this is great. I love it. That's what you're hoping for, of course, but whether it happens or not. But it doesn't just stop there. You know, it's more than just, it's unlikely to be just confirmation of I love it and then they go on. There's a conversation around, well, why did they love it? And you can finesse it more. So confusion, a positive, well, you know, the other one, it's negative. But you got to brace, you know, brace for that, embrace that. That's still feedback. So the third thing, they might go, when you're talking about novelty and what's new, and you say, and at the risk of, don't want to, okay, I'm not going to use your setting. So, you know, if they say, for novelty, you said, this will be the first study ever done in Australia. And that's it. That's all you say. Now, as a supervisor, I'd say, well, okay, at a superficial and trivial level, yes, that is new. That's new. It's a, if let's say that it's true. I mean, often I find when there's a claim, this is the first studied in a particular jurisdiction or country, it's actually not even true. But let's assume that it is true. It is the first study. Okay, that's something, but it's not very much. And so they might, so it could evoke some degree of, well, on the face of it is negativity, but it's feedback. And then you have a discussion and hopefully get a constructive discussion about, so you say, oh, well, yes, it's the first study in Australia, and then, the institutional differences in Australia mean that blah, 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 whatever. So it starts a conversation. So that's what I would think about it as, and the way I'd recommend, if you're not being asked by your supervisor to have a crack at that, and particularly if you're in a situation where you feel you don't know how to start the conversation, you don't feel like you're not feeling the love in an appropriate way, or why not try it? Why not try it? The one thing I'd say about this is if you view that as a form that you're filling out, okay, and these days, I mean, a lot of it's electronic, but there's still forms that we need to fill out. Just earlier, I had to fill out, for my university, they've got a particular, I'm still learning how this new university works, but anyway, there's some additional funding that they provide, and there's a form you've got to fill out. Now, luckily, you were busy in your session. I mean, I'm a guest here, so I have to, all my frustration, but, if you heard the language that was in my head, I hate filling in forms. Does anyone in this room like filling in forms? I don't think so. We all hate it, right? What do forms ask you? What is your name? Now, what we hate is when we're filling out the same form over and over again for the same organisation or situation, and you have to, can't they pre-populate these? But anyway, that's enough. What is your name? What is, what's your date? It's all factual stuff. And if it's a long form, before the end, I feel so depressed and need some help. This is not a form. It looks like it's a form. And if you view it as a form, you're going to hate it. So you embrace it. And there's a variety of things I can say to you. And I've already hinted at one as to why this is not a form. There are no facts. There are no independent facts in any item here. Particularly when you should recognise, as soon as you decide that you want to change one thing, it usually will be one or more others need. So it's not a form, it's not based, it's not about you trying to recollect. And even if, and the forms I really hate is where, and usually they're to do with visas. How many countries have you visited in the last 5 years, and list them? Now, for someone who travels a lot and worried about if you inadvertently leave a country out or are perceived to lie, this can be stressful. Anyhow, it's not about facts. And in fact, even that's not to say to invent things. You're putting in factual, as much as you can identify as factual information, but it's all conditional and it's all time sensitive in the sense that as you go down the journey and you get better, more information, you read more paper, your thinking develops, This can all change. And that's one of the reasons why, and this is a great example of, do not aim perfection here. Do the best you can in the time available, because perfection is a mirage. As soon as you start talking to your supervisor and they give you feedback and you spend all that time perfecting something, and it sort of gets thrown out, and part of the problem there is, in terms of perfectionism, you're emotionally attached to it. And we all have some degree, I know I do, particularly when you write something and you really like the sound of it and you don't want to throw it away. You're emotionally attached to it. So that's another reason why this is not about perfection. It's doing the best you can. You want to start a conversation knowing it's not going to be perfect. Some things will be good. Some things won't be so good. Some things will be stronger. Some things will be weaker. And the really sort of interesting thing here is something that was strong today, as your research evolves, might become weaker later on. But it's still a useful tool. It's a useful tool. In my view, and I've had a lot of people confirm this, but not everyone will agree, it captures the essence of the things that a supervisor wants to know about. So why not try and give them what your current thinking is on all of these acts? So the slides that go. Well, first of all, just some general advice. One thing that I think is critical to realise here is you've got a limit. I think if I say to you, use as many words as you like, it's going to defeat the purpose. I've seen students that will want to write 10,000 words. There'll be pages and pages and pages. You've got to get the message down as succinctly as you can. That's your best chance of getting a busy professor to give you feedback. Think of it this way. You're walking with 2 pages, 850 words. You give it to your professor. You've got a half-hour meeting. If they're an expert in the field, the 850 words they can read in less than 10 minutes. And you've got 20 minutes or more of the start of a conversation, because they'll have that many comments and questions. You won't be able to finish it in that meeting. So 1,000 words, I think it's a rule of thumb. It's a heuristic. There's no science to it, but over time, I'm absolutely convinced up to 1,200 words. As soon as you go above 1,200, you lose me. You're starting to lose me, and as a receiver of this, it just seems too hard. Less than about 800. I've seen some really, some people talented enough in 700 words, 800 words can do a really good job. A lot of people can't do it. And if it's too succinct, so clear and focused, meaningful, based, connected internally, start a conversation. And as I've stressed the start of a conversation thing quite a bit. So there's a bunch of slides here. I've got no time to talk about them, but they're in pairs. And so for each of the 11 items, I say a couple of things related to that item to sort of just help you sort of get closer to it. So working title, a couple of quotes here by Belch. Is the highway billboard of your article. Clemens, similar thing, is your shop front. If it doesn't appeal to your reader, then they won't read further. But it's got to be concise. It's got to be to the point. It's got to be reflective of what you plan to do. And then the second of the two, so there's a pattern that's going to go through here. The second is 3 quick tips. So 3 quick tips on the working title: be meaningful, succinct, and engaging. I suggest aim for 3 key elements to your working title. I'm a big believer. I think the number 3, as this is a little aside, and one of my inspires thoughts of the week is basically around try and structure your thinking around 3s. guess what? There are 3 quick tips, and there are 3 quick tips all the way through. Use appropriate language and concepts. And it goes on, the research question, make clear, clear sense, neutral language. Number 3 is interesting. Try and avoid trivial questions. A good example of a trivial research question is where, at least on the face of it, it literally has a yes or no answer. Something like, does blah, blah, blah exist? That's your research question. Well, it either does or it doesn't. Next, very likely, the real research question is somewhat more deeper than that. Don't express it as a simple yes, no. So it goes on. So there's no time to go through all those, but yeah. Well, yeah. So again, I tried to induce some questions previously, but any questions or comments?
Teaching format you mentioned 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yep.
Equally applicable and easily used for sociological research as well as financial research.
I believe so. I think it's a universal framework. Clearly I'm a finance researcher. I've done some accounting research, and I know finance and accounting, it works fine. Quantitative research generally, I think it works very well. I believe, but others disagree, it works fine for qualitative. There is Sumit Lodia, an accounting academic in Australia a number of years ago, got published a variation of it where instead of idea, data and tools, there's a qualitative substitution. I can't remember. I think one of them's theory, context or something like but my view is it's universal and it works in any quantitative discipline for sure. Qualitative, I've seen very good example qualitatively. It's not very good at analytical and or theory. It's just not designed for theory. So, and one reason why is I've got data in there. So in theory research, you don't have data.
Any other question due to the time we can entertain one question.
Yep.
Yes, right. Mark from the doctor's journey, what is to embark the journey. We have all completed the journey. By the way, the pitching award winner last time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Quickly menu at the end. So, I mean, the rest of the slides you can work, I think they're worth getting, but there's just more detailed stuff around the resources that I've developed. So, the pitching research matters, micro credential, it's free, you do it, get 70%. And you got, this is something you put on your CV, and you get an electronic certificate that verifies you've done the course. And one you can make a case that you picked up some skills along the way. The research, the website, the Inspires network. I encourage you to think about, going back to the point early on in one of those tips from ChatGPT is around networking, and the most obvious network will be close to you, but this is a global network that you can belong to. And then these thoughts of the week. So maybe I'll finish on this, and you've got a chance to think of one final question before we close. So these are available on my LinkedIn. So there's number 1, the 22nd of October, research passion, good and bad. So I told you the gist of that one. Planning research is a master chef recipe. I can tell you about that now. We don't have time. Unlocking research insights with heuristic principles. Mastering time management. There we go. The 3x3 guide for novice researchers. So it's I think the famous person was, I forget. It was a 2x2, so I've got a 3x3 version. Embracing risk management as a natural edge in research project. Mastering 2x2 characterizations of topic choice, research risk. Hook, don't hype, winning over referees in the first 60 seconds. So I don't know whether any of you will be invited or interested, but tomorrow I'm going to talk about a few of these in some detail. So I'll skip the next one. 3 steps to your first academic paper: reproduce, replicate, innovate. 5 seconds is all it takes. Mysterious. Harnessing phantom issues and research, a hidden superpower for novice researchers. Mastering the message, avoid giving the wrong impression in research communication. Idea depth versus obscurity, striking the right balance, open science.
So they are all available if you.
Yeah, they're just short. They take you about 3 to 5 minutes to read, and and just it gives you a bit of an insight.
So we need to connect with you through LinkedIn.
I think you can access them without connecting to me. I'm not entirely sure. You possibly have to connect. I apologize if you do. I mean, I'm not happy. The devil's advocate in research, reading the tea leaves. That's it. Unlocking research potential, the 3 game-changing strategies for new ideas. The Goldilocks principle in research, that's the one that's just come out. Not too much and not too little. And to whet your appetite, and I'll leave it here. There's 6 I've got backed up, ready to go in the coming weeks. Chasing the gold standard in research. When to abandon a research idea, without it negative, but it's not all negative, particularly if it's early on. The power of the puzzle in research, the power of tension in research, the why behind the what, testing alternative mechanisms, and the last one's definitely a quantitative one, so not many of you be interested. Causality is king. So have a look at that. We had the winner from 2 years ago, the Inspires, or the local winner of the Inspires Global Pitching Research Competition. We've got a new one coming, so you might be interested we can encourage you to do so. And there's a LinkedIn post there that you can find out about it. All right, well, I've enjoyed chatting to you. Hopefully, there's something, I've got over the threshold of making you feel like it was a total waste of time. I wish you well in your PhD journey. There is one opportunity still. If you've got a question, speak now or all right, well, thank you so much. And,
Dr. Faf, Professor Faf, I'm Tissa. On behalf, it's privilege to offer you a vote of thanks on behalf of the class of DBA students at PIM. In fact, the Professor Faf, the name for last so many months, we were going through every week, every day, because 4-3-2-1 format was the format we were not doing that because week after week we were asked to fill it, not 1 time, 2 times. Probably we went through that dozens of times. A couple of months ago when I did it first time, one evening my wife gave me a piece of paper. She said, this was on your laundry garment and it was on your back pocket. You put something on back pocket only when it is either secret or sacred. And then she couldn't understand what that was. Probably she thought it was sacred, which was true. For telling you the truth, we perhaps haven't still mastered. And I was thinking, why on earth Professor Pfaff put a 1,000-word limit on that paper? Then later I realized, if I cannot explain that in 1,000 words, I don't know what I'm doing. The clarity comes when you super finely 2,000 words. And you were absolutely right. Thank you very much for, giving such a wonderful, effective tools. Few things that I got during last almost 1.5 hours. Um, you reconfirmed our understanding. You told us that it is okay to be confused. Seriously, we were confused before joining the doctoral program, and we were confused in that the beginning. Now we are in the middle, and we are still confused. I believe we will be more confused by the end. And I'm thinking whether after the completing it, whether even we will be continue to be confused. But I believe so. Yeah, and you made us very comfortable, showing that you use ChatGPT to teach us. Now I can talk to my professor or the supervisor and say, if it is good for Professor Faf, why it is not good for us? I have I can quote. Now in our journey, they asked us, please don't, your voice has less meaning in review, and you have to come out with somebody else's voice, give the right support literature. So I can quote your name to use the AI tools. Yeah. And you showed us it's okay to be embarrassed and stupid. And this is what we feel each time when we went through the workshops. And after talking to the supervisor or the professor, and we feel that. And right now, most of the students are going through, we call it a Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more knowledge we acquire, we feel smaller and smaller. This goes through, and I believe the clarity will come later.
Saying, the more knowledge you collect, the more you realize, the more you know that you
don't know. Absolutely. Yeah. And we also had a couple of our teammates had thought of, doing it as fast as possible. Some were even at the beginning envisaging finish it in 3 years. Now come to the reality, and doing a good job takes a lot of time. Now we have grown up, most of us have grown up that idea. And something that resonate with us, because some of our ABO students are practitioners. We immediately jump into consulting and solutions. That the first question that you asked, we start with solution and try to figure out how to do the research to find the answer we already have. Thank you very much for awakening us to that reality. I must thank PIM staff, Director Dr. Asankarana Singh, and the co-host, co-coordinators, the Senior Professor Ajanta Dharmasri and Dr. Trevor Mandis, for giving us opportunity, making you available to enlighten this doctoral class of doctoral students. I believe some of us will connect with you, your free tools to connect and enrich ourselves through the networking. Yeah, and we will have this discussions in future, and we want to see you often within next couple of years again. And thank you very much. And shall we give a round of applause to Professor Fab? Thank you very much.
Great pleasure and I've enjoyed it.